Hi, this is Crystal Cyrus from the OOTW podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 153, Fletch Movie Review. Hey, I'm Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. You're going to find us on Twitter at Amaron_DM, that's Derek, and at C McBrien, that's me, and popgoesyourworld.com is our website. You'll find all of our contact information there. Derek, what's new in the world of pop culture for you, my friend?
Hey, Chris.
Hi.
Well, I haven't really had a chance to consume a lot of new stuff this week. My workload, my day job has really ramped up, so that's keeping me busy. But
You mean this isn't all that we do for a living?
well, hey, if only, that'd be living the dream for sure. But I figure since we're a pop culture podcast, we are absolutely obligated to talk at least a little bit about the television Emmy Awards that happened between the last show and this show. Did you have a chance to watch any of the broadcast?
I did not watch the broadcast, but I'm aware of what happened.
Okay, that was my next question is, are you aware of the outcome? So again, this isn't an Emmys podcast, so we don't have to dwell on it, but I just wanted to note that two of the shows that I love that I was hoping would win certainly did. So for the best limited series, The Watchmen, based partly on the original Alan Moore comic from the 1980s, but was upgraded for 2019. Won for best show, and Regina King and oh my god, I can't think of the other guy's name. They won for the lead actor, lead actress. Well deserving. Watchmen, absolutely, in my opinion, the best show that was on TV last year. Succession won for drama, another fantastic ensemble. And again, the lead actor won for that as well. So I was very happy to see that. And then I think the biggest surprise of the night for everybody was in the comedy category. A little Canadian show called Schitt's Creek won everything. It won 7 Emmys. It swept every category, and
Including all the acting awards.
yeah, it literally won actor, actress, supporting actress, best show, best director, and best writer. And 4 of those Emmys went to Eugene Levy's son. I believe his first name is Dan, if I remember correctly. And he won 4 Emmys so he won producer, for best show, for best writing, best directing, and for best supporting actor performance. So it's like, I don't know if anyone's ever won 4 Emmys in one broadcast before for the same show, but it was a clean sweep, and I think a lot of people felt it was well deserved, and I think a lot of people were like, I've never heard of this show. So it's always nice when a little Canadian show that has been on the air for 6 seasons finally gets a little bit of recognition. So congratulations to all the people who won, but a special congratulations to the people that put together Schitt's Creek in Canada to have this little Canadian show go on to win the most prestigious television awards. So,
and you know what the most interesting thing about Schitt's Creek is that at the podcast around here, we have a censor, right? So we get beeped out from time to time if we say bad words. You can say Schitt's Creek, but you can't say So you could say Schitt's Creek is awesome as You see how that works? It's like, it's just amazing. So, yeah. So
anyway, to extend on that idea of the good little Canadian shows, one of the other Canadian shows that wasn't recognized in the Emmys, but that is doing very well here in Canada, and we've talked about before, is Kim's Convenience. So if people are looking for something to watch and you haven't already checked out Schitt's Creek, might I suggest you take a look at Kim's Convenience? I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but I recently discovered Kim's Convenience on Netflix. That show is awesome. It is fantastic. I absolutely love that show. Not just because it's Canadian. It's just so good. It's so original. The writing on it is top notch, and the acting on it, it's just, I love that show. It's so
solid
good.
cast starring my good friend Paul Hyung-sung Lee as Appa, as the patriarch of the family.
And And it's not just a Canadian thing, like where Americans like, hey, do you know this person? You actually.
I literally know. Yeah, Paulie and I go way back.
You and Paul are good friends, and you have been for years. A couple of things I wanted to mention in pop culture. My things always tend to revolve around my kids, but I mean, it's just the way it is. So my 11-year-old and I went up to the trailer and spent some time together, just the two of us. We wanted to spend a weekend together. And so I also took along a movie because we have a DVD player in there for at night. And we watched the 1980 film My Bodyguard. Have you ever seen that movie, Derek?
I have not, but you've been telling me that it's on the list of things you want me to watch, and I've been like, I never even heard of this movie. But.
Oh, well, I will get you to watch it at some point. It's like I say, it's from 1980. It's with Chris Makepeace, a Canadian actor, and
From
Adam
Meatballs?
Yes, the guy from Meatballs. That's exactly right. And he was in a show on Dungeons and Dragons movie they made called Mazes and Monsters with Tom Hanks back in the 80s. And then he just kind of stopped acting. But he's in it, and Adam Baldwin is in it, and Martin Mull, and a couple other people. But it's a great movie, and I wanted him to see it as an 11-year-old because it's about now it's about high school. He's not quite there yet, but it's about what it's like to go to school and to be bullied. And how you deal with bullies. So I thought it was important for him to see, and he really, really liked it. The other thing is with my other son, my 7-year-old, I finished reading Charlotte's Web to him just the other night. And I mentioned before how I was reading that book to him, and I was like, hey, I can see where this is going. I was worried about where this book's going. Man, oh man, what an amazing book. Like, it took everything I had just to get through, especially the last sentence of the second last chapter. Like where she dies alone in a field.
Yeah.
And then when Wilbur describes her in the very final sentence of the book, the author says, the line is something I'm paraphrasing, but he says something like, not many people are a good writer or a good friend, but Charlotte was both. I don't know what it is about that book. I think it's because, like I mentioned before, like I lost my best friend at a young age. So it just hit a little close to home for me. I don't know, but it was just such a good book. And so anyway, I'm reading this to him, and I'm really struggling to get through it. And my son is like, "It's okay, Daddy. It's just a spider." I'm like, apparently my son has no soul. I don't know. I'm like, no, it's not just a spider. It's his best friend. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, it's just a spider. So anyway, it's so funny.
Now let me ask you: has your son seen the Charlotte's Web cartoon?
So funny enough,
before reading the book, or after reading?
No. So funny enough that you mentioned it. So we got done the book. So then I mentioned to him. I said, "There's two versions of this film. There's a live action one that they did a couple years ago, and there is an animated film from the '70s." And so he said, "I want to watch the animated one." So we put it on, and
good call.
He lost interest in it almost 15 minutes in. Now, he has autism, so he struggles with his attention span at times.
Sure.
But also the fact, I think, that it was a musical, which kind of threw me off, too. So
I don't remember that.
Yeah, there's a lot of musical numbers in it. So I think he was like, this isn't what I'm expecting. So,
Wow.
Anyway, so the reading that book proves, that I'm a sappy old guy. But I'm also a lame old guy. So
here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, what did the dad do when he caught his son chewing on an electrical cord?
I don't know.
He had to ground him.
Oh my God. I was going to say he was shocked to see him doing such a crazy thing, but ground him. That's much better.
That's a good one too. I like that. I was the only man left on the planet after the Holocaust, eh?
Because you're probably drunk.
That's why I just spent all my time looking for beer.
Save me one of those beers.
No way, eh?
Experience and maturity.
I gotta take a leak so bad I can taste it.
I don't know how they got him to do it.
You drive. There's a lot of cops around.
It was a different time.
No, I've had enough beer.
Some of the things from the early 80s, it's hard to relate to them now.
Oh, come on. That's some funny right there. Okay, so this week it was over to me. My opportunity to pick a movie. So, of course, I nominated a Gen X film. Of course, that's what I do. Went back to 1985, and I decided I would put Fletch, on the table for this week. I guess before I get into this, I have some general thoughts about this, and I have lots to get into with this movie. So before I get into it, Eddie thought, he was funny because when I mentioned this last week, I said, I want to watch Fletch. And you were like, yes, I just watched it recently. This is great. I'm all excited about this. So I'm just going to assume that, you enjoyed it. I think most people I know enjoyed it back in the 80s. You watched it recently, You know, you probably, knowing you probably went back and watched it again for this show. What are your thoughts on watching Fletch after, 35 years?
Sure. So as you just said, and as I mentioned last show, I actually just watched Fletch like less than 2 months ago. So I felt it was pretty fresh, and I was going to try and watch it again this week if I had time. Unfortunately, I didn't, and unfortunately, I had a hard time trying to track down a copy, although I did see I could rent it off of YouTube, but I didn't get around to doing it. But YouTube is always your friend when it comes to these kinds of things, because they had, I think it was the 10 best clips from Fletch. So I went back and watched. They were like 3 or 4 minute clips. So I ended up watching like probably 20 or 30 minutes worth of the movie, sort of as the quote unquote best of Fletch. So that was enough for me to certainly jog my memory. But like I said, I just watched it not too long ago, so that wasn't really a big issue for me. So I may be foggy on some of the very finer points, but I'm usually pretty good about retaining the details. So in general, back to your original question, when this came out in 85, I would have been 11. I don't believe I saw this in the theater. In fact, I'm positive I did not see this in the theater. I would have still been a little bit too young. I definitely saw it for the first time on home video, probably only a few years after that. Like I'm thinking maybe 88, 89-ish. So it's probably around 13. And I remember when I was younger, I was not a big fan of Chevy Chase. I didn't find his style of comedy funny. Like he very much relied, like from his whole Saturday Night Live, he used to always fall down and do silly things, a lot of slapstick, make faces, like people would be talking and he'd be behind them making faces and stuff. I don't know. I never found that shtick really worked for me. And so I was never a big fan of him as a performer. And as a result, with something like Fletch, where he's the star, I never really found that I enjoyed it that much. So when I had a chance to watch it again just a couple of months back, it had been so long since I saw it, because I probably hadn't seen it since the late 80s or early 90s. Mm-hmm. Because I had this sort of negative memory of it, I never made a point of going back to watch it again, because I thought, I remember that movie. I didn't like it. Why waste my time again? But as we've discussed, we used, earlier when COVID started, we got a lot of the movie channels for free, and it was one of the ones on there. And so I recorded it. So I thought, I'll give it a chance. It's on TV. It cost me nothing except my time. And I actually enjoyed it a lot more when I watched it again recently. I think partly because my sense of humor has matured, if you will. I can appreciate Chevy Chase and his performance a little more. I think I got a lot of the adult humor that I may have missed as a younger person. So I certainly enjoyed it a lot more this time than I did the first time around when I was younger. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that Chevy Chase is my favorite, but he is certainly, I hold him in higher regard now than I did back then. And so I was glad for the opportunity to rewatch it. I was glad you've nominated it for us to discuss today. There were certainly a lot of things I very much liked about it, largely because it was sort of an 80s movie, but there were definitely some things that I felt, I didn't care for. Some of the thoughts were things that I maybe didn't care for originally that I still don't care for, and maybe some just because of some of the stuff that doesn't hold up as much. So we'll dive into it and we can talk about it more.
So I'd like to talk about just some general thoughts I have about the movie just in general before we get into scene by scene, because we always break down the movie. So I will be honest, I was a little bit worried going into this movie that it just would not hold up very good. And then when the movie opens up, there's the opening theme music and it's really dated. It really sounds 80s, got that funky guitar riff in it and stuff. And like it's some really serious 80s stuff. And then it's followed up by some really serious 80s synth music, as the movie starts. But you know what? I thought this movie held up really, really well. And I was really surprised because, like I said, I haven't seen it in a long time. It's been 30 years since I've seen it, as most of the movies are. We do on the podcast. I haven't seen them in a long time. So I was a little bit, I was worried. I didn't think it would hold up. But one of the reasons that I think it does hold up so well is that this is a very unique movie. It's very unique for a lot of reasons. First of all, it has a little bit of everything in it. It's got mystery, it's got humor and intrigue and romance and action. It's all in this movie. Another thing I really like about it, and I know you mentioned you didn't really like Chevy Chase, at least back in the day. He's one of the things I really liked about this movie. So for any millennials that listen to the podcast that have never seen this movie, or maybe their only exposure to Chevy Chase is he's in Community or that awful hot tub time machine crap that you had me watch, it might be hard to imagine for some people, but Chevy Chase, like, his career has been up and down, and I'm sure we'll touch base on that, but he was on his game here. And he was one of the most charismatic movie stars of the late 70s, early 80s. The thing is, I think, almost unfortunately, he had a real mixed bag of movies, you know, even around that time. Because on the good side, you had things like Caddyshack and the first Vacation movie, Spies Like Us, I thought was awesome. This one, Fletch, obviously. And although I thought Foul Play and Neil Simon Seems Like Old Times were both really, really good too. But he made a lot of crap around this time too. There's Oh Heavenly Dog and Modern Problems and Under the Rainbow, Deal of the Century. And then he just kind of dropped off the map. But for me, his good movies were really, really good. And the thing is that Chevy Chase was a big part of that time in history when Hollywood comedies were dominated by the improv movement that was coming out of Second City and National Lampoon and you know, Saturday Night Live. And for me, he's the reason why this movie is so good. And funny enough, though, it's probably not really for the reasons that you might think, because I think normally, you know, a lead actor in a comedy tends to be a bit over the top, especially back in the 70s and 80s. You know, and even if you think about what he was like in Vacation, you know, Clark Griswold was a doofus, right? It was kind of over the top. But in Fletch, and I've never really picked up on it until going back and watching it now, is what he does with this part is actually kind of incredible what he does. Because instead of the craziness of the movie or all the comedy like sort of centering around him and his character, there's insanity going on, but it's happening all around him. And all he does is just react to it. And I think one of the best things about the movie is his performance, is how he reacts to everything that's going on. Instead of being over the top, he underplays the scenes. Now it can come off as maybe a bit aloof, you know, or maybe even detached from the material, like from an acting point of view. But I think for me, it's integral to how this movie works. Does any of that make any sense?
Yeah. So let me sort of piggyback on a little bit of that stuff. So let's start at the beginning. So the music, I actually found the music was really good. Like for me, that did it for me. I was it reminded me of a slightly lesser Beverly Hills Cop, which had come out, yes, I think only 1 or 2 years before this.
Yeah, it came out the same year.
Yeah, so when you watch Beverly Hills Cop, which is fantastic, and hey, we should totally do that on a future pod.
Oh, we will.
The music is pivotal. The movie wouldn't work without that 80s synth score, and so I felt that this almost was like, hey, that worked. Let's do that again. And so I was at first a little worried that I'm like, oh, are they sort of leaning on this as a crutch? But I actually thought it worked. I thought it was, although in a similar style, because it's obviously from a similar time, it was different enough, and it was memorable enough. Like it had its own legit theme, and that worked for me a lot. I actually enjoyed the musical score. I mean, it certainly dates the movie, but there are tons of other things that date this movie, and it doesn't date it in a bad way. Like one of the worst examples, I think I brought this up on a previous show, is the movie Lady Hawk with Matthew Broderick and Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer, yeah.
It, as a fantasy story, is creative and interesting, but it's got an 80s synth score, and it just kills the movie. It'd be like, imagine like if Star Wars, which came out in the 70s, was all disco music.
Yeah, right.
Like you couldn't watch that today and take it seriously, because the music would just kill it for you. Whereas with this, I found the music was appropriate for the time frame in which the movie is set. And so to me, it didn't feel like it was dated. It was dated because it came out in the 80s. It wasn't dated because it was 80s, if that makes sense. So that was sort of my thoughts on that. The other one, you talked about why you thought it was one of the reasons you thought it was a good movie is a little bit of everything. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I think it worked for me too, is at its heart, it's basically like he's an investigative reporter. So it's a mystery. It's a detective story. As a Batman fan, nothing appeals to me more than a good mystery story, a good detective story. Not that I'm comparing Chevy Chase to Batman, but just the idea of this sort of the whodunit, the what's really going on, the character only has certain pieces of the puzzle, and through the course of the story, as they learn more information, we as the audience get that information, and we can all together. And that kind of a story to me usually, if it's done well, can work really well. And so that was one of the things I enjoyed about watching it, because I didn't really remember the intricacies of the story, just sort of the very, very broad strokes. It worked for me. By the end, I sort of remembered where it was going, but it was an interesting journey to take along the way and see how the characters got from point A to point B to point C to point D, and then and the movie. The in my opinion, again, not a huge fan of Chevy Chase, but in my opinion, this was his best movie. This was his best work.
Yeah, I think so.
He was the star. Like, this was the starring vehicle. Yes, he's in Caddyshack, and yes, he's in Spies Like Us. But it's like in those other movies, he has a lot of other people with him. I mean, Spies Like Us, it's Dan Aykroyd, so it's more of a twosome. But like Caddyshack is a huge ensemble of performers, whereas this is the Chevy Chase spotlight. This is like, okay, bud, you've proven that you're a big star. You've proven you can carry a movie with other support. You are now the A person on you're the number one name above the headline, above the title on the poster. Go.
And he's in every scene too. Like, he is literally in every single scene.
Well, and I mean, that's the advantage of having a story where it's sort of told from his point of view, is we as the audience don't know anything that he doesn't know. So we're not seeing any scenes where he's not in it. And that was the design of the narrative. And I mean, this is based on a series of books. So I got to assume the book is written in the same way, where we only know what the character knows. But like you said, his career has sort of had ups and downs, this being certainly one of the very high points. He was, he was climbing this mountain of success, with this possibly even being the peak in the 80s. But from what I've heard,
I would say this was.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stuff about this movie and about Caddyshack and some of the other things. And what I kept hearing, true or not, was that Chevy Chase was often very difficult to work with, and that essentially was a big part of why his career sort of had some lulls after so much success. And I got to think, like so many other people, you get a little bit of success, it goes to your head, you read your own press, and it's great, and you think, I am that great, and suddenly, you hold yourself above other people. Now, he is a great performer and certainly is great. So, I mean, I can sort of understand where that might have been the case and might have been a problem. But again, who knows if these stories are true or not?
Yeah, I don't know if he was really difficult to work with. I think it was more that there was a lot of substance abuse going on around this time for him. And I mean, a lot of that it started back when he was on SNL. I mean, because of the pratfalls and stuff like that. He got hurt more than once doing those pratfalls at the opening of the show, and ended up getting addicted to painkillers. But I mean, that led to other things in the 80s. So you're right, his career's been up and down like crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, they ended up doing a sequel to this movie. So it obviously, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about the specifics down the road, but I mean, the movie obviously did well enough, made enough money, was received well enough, had enough critical success that they felt there was enough there to do a sequel. I mean, like I said, it's based on a series of books. So you certainly had source material to draw from. It wasn't like, we don't know what to do next. Read the next novel. Okay, great. Let's turn this into a movie. So who knows? We'll see where we go with this.
Yeah,
so,
and he definitely did peak in 85, because he had 3 movies out that year. He had this movie, Fletch, obviously, which was number 9th, at the box office, because it made over $50 million. Number 11 was National Lampoon's European Vacation. And number 20 was Spies Like Us. Now, the only reason Spies Like Us wasn't higher was because it came out on December the 6th of that year. So it only had like 3 weeks to make some money. It ended up doubling its take, into 86. But I mean, this was definitely his peak. One other thing about Chevy Chase, now that we're on him, when it comes to making this movie, and again, it doesn't speak to the fact that he was difficult to work with, but I mean, one of the things, he's an improv guy.
I was just going to say
he comes out of that National Lampoon, out of SNL. He was the first breakout star of SNL. He left after the first season. He left 4 episodes or 4 weeks or whatever it was into the second season of SNL. He left the show, right, to go and make movies with Goldie Hawn, right? So he was the first breakout star.
Now, let me jump in for a second. Mm-hmm. One of the things I had heard, true or false, about part of the reason he was the quote unquote breakout star was because he was on Weekend Update and he said his name. Like, I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. Mm-hmm. It put his name in the consciousness of the TV public. And when you ask people after one season who's on Saturday Night Live, they could all say Chevy Chase because he used his own name on every show.
And he opened the show. And he opened the show every week. Every week, the cold opening was him. Other than the first episode where they did the Wolverine sketch, he was the opening show. He was the opening of the show. He'd started off. He'd do a pratfall and say live from New York at Saturday night. Mm-hmm. And he was a good looking guy. You know, he was a really handsome guy, right? He had that movie star good look. But my point was, like, he was such an improv guy. Came out of that improv movement, that when he goes to make this movie, he wanted to improv a lot of the scenes. And God bless the director, like Michael Ritchie, because what he did was the director said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to shoot a scene. We're going to shoot it once the way it's written in the script. Let's just shoot it that way. And then let's shoot it again your way and just improv. And it was quite an ingenious way to direct the film, because it gave the director what he needed, you know, for the scenes, you know, as they were written, but then allowed him to intercut a lot of the improvisation that happened. And a lot of the improv ended up making it into the film. And it was almost an intercut between the two in every scene. So Chevy Chase, you know, got kind of what he wanted. The director got what he wanted. It was kind of a neat thing. But in addition to Chevy Chase, another thing that I really liked about this movie was actually the supporting cast. Like, wow, every supporting character in this movie is really, really strong. And the thing is, when you got a guy like Chevy Chase at the center of a film, you need a really, really strong supporting cast, especially with a script like this. And I felt that they really delivered. You know, it's partially a testament to the actors, but partially a testament to the director too, you know. Now, Michael Ritchie, the director, he didn't do much else. I mean, he did The Candidate, The Bad News Bears, the one from the 70s, and The Island, one of Peter Benchley's other movies. It wasn't a very good one. But the supporting cast I thought was amazing. I just want to run down them for a second. So Richard Libertini, I was always a big fan of him. He was a big improv guy out of Chicago.
I recognize him. He's one of those, like, that guy. It's like, oh, I recognize that guy, but I couldn't tell you what his name was.
I really liked him in Sharky's Machine. It was a Burt Reynolds movie.
Reynolds? Never saw it.
Oh, it's really, really good. It's really dated. I actually went back and watched it a couple of years ago. It's really dated, but God, it was good. Good cop movie. And he did a movie, you talk about Canadians, he did a movie with Eugene Levy called Going Berserk. It was Eugene Levy and John Candy and Joe Flaherty. And he died in 2016, I think it was. Richard Libertine, I liked him, but he was really solid in this. George Weiner, who was also in Spaceballs. Remember, he was he was the guy in the apartment.
Sir. Yeah,
he was in Spaceballs. He was like, he's an asshole, sir. That's his name, major asshole. And George Wendt, you know, Norm from Cheers, obviously. But the thing was, he didn't do a lot of movie roles. He was in My Bodyguard that I just mentioned. He had a really small part in My Bodyguard, and Gung Ho. But that was pretty much about it.
Well, I mean, he had a tremendous amount of success with Cheers. It's not like he was looking for work, right? It's
no.
Well, I mean, he might be now if he was still performing, but yeah. So, and then of course we've got Tim Matheson, who is great. He's been in lots of great things. I mean, he had been in Animal House before this,
which funny enough was written for and was supposed to star Chevy Chase.
Oh, well, I'd heard that. Yeah.
His part, and at the time, Chevy Chase was that breakout star from SNL, so he was like, I'm not doing that movie. I'm not doing a little part in an ensemble because I want to be the lead actor in a movie, right? So went to Tim Matheson, and funny enough, Tim Matheson was pretty good at playing the bad guy here, you know. But before that, he was known for playing that smart aleck type, just like Fletch. Like if you think of his roles in Animal House, and I remember there was a movie he was in called Up the Creek. Same thing. He was a smart alecky kind of guy. So yeah, I thought he was good. William Sanderson.
I always remember him from The West Wing. He played the vice president.
That's right.
That was when, you know, I mean, I knew him from Animal House, but I hadn't seen a lot of his other stuff. And then, when he was in The West Wing, I was like, oh man, he's so good.
Gina Davis was in it.
Tiny little part. Like obviously this has to be one of her second movies.
First movie was Tootsie. This was her second movie, but you know, obviously she went on to do Thelma and Louise and League of Their Own. She won an Academy Award for the actual
she won an
tourist,
Oscar, yeah.
You know, William Sanderson, I was going to mention too. He was Swarthout, the realtor. Remember, he was in Blade Runner. He was Sebastian.
Yes,
and of course, he was Larry on Newhart of Larry, Daryl, and Daryl.
Yeah,
Emmett Walsh that played the Doctor. Even him. Remember, he was in The Jerk.
Yeah,
and he starts shooting at Steve Martin, and Steve Martin he hates his cans. James Avery, kind of a blink and you'll miss him kind of role, but he was the dad in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Remember, he was one of the corrupt cops that brought
Uncle
him in.
Phil. No, he was Uncle Phil in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Sorry, yeah, that's right, Uncle Phil. And then the last one I want to mention is Dana Wheeler Nicholson, because she didn't really do anything else other than this movie. Probably because she wasn't a very good actress, I don't think. She was a complete unknown at the time. I mean, a lot of other well-known actresses came in and read for this role, but she got the part of Gail Stanwyck because her reading was just so strong in the audition. But she's not a very good actress. I think it shows here too. But overall,
hang on. So I'm looking at her thing here. She's still working to this day.
Oh,
she
she's
has
a working
63
actress.
acting credits.
Yeah, she's working.
I mean, it looks like she was on the Friday Night Lights television series, like 20 or 30 episodes worth, and then on the Nashville television series for 10 or 15 episodes. So I mean, she's obviously working, like she's a working actress. But yeah, to your point, I mean, she was very pretty in this movie, but I didn't think her performance was outstanding.
No. But this was a really strong supporting cast. So it was just, wow. I wanted to mention that. But anyway, so let's get into the movie a little bit. We like to break things down scene by scene. So as I mentioned, the opening credits come as it's a real kind of 80s song. And the thing that's really struck me about it was in today's world of these elaborate opening credit sequences, this is just some white credits against a plain black screen. It's just another example of that difference between the Gen X and the millennial movies, Mm-hmm. But anyway, so it opens up. Fletch is hanging out at the beach because he's an undercover reporter. And we know that because he's doing a voiceover. So I should mention too, another reason I mentioned earlier why I think this movie is really unique. Another reason I think it's unique, it's kind of a throwback to the film noir of the 40s. Where you've got like an investigator trying to piece together a mystery. And those movies always had a voiceover in them as well to explain everything that's going on. And we see that here. But, the difference is this one has humor in it. But again, the thing that makes it so unique is this is not a parody. It's more of like almost a comedy drama.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not really the first time we've seen this sort of thing from Chevy Chase, because if you think of his first movie when he did Foul Play, it was like that too. It was kind of a drama and a mystery and an action, and a little bit of humor in it.
I don't know. I've never seen it.
Oh, it's really good. But anyway, so Fletch is obviously investigating the drug traffic on the beach for this big story he's writing for the newspaper. And that's when we meet, some of the characters on the beach, like Fat Sam and Gummy and Creasy. And I just want to mention that I was mentioning the supporting cast. I like the guy that plays Crease. Like at one point, Fletch says to him, he asks how old he is. And Crease says, I'm 19. Fletch is like, you're not taking very good care of yourself. I just thought that line was so funny because I like that guy that played Crease. His name was Ralph Seymour. I don't know if he was in a really short-lived TV show called Making It back in 1979. So they basically created this TV show based on David Naughton's one-hit wonder song, Making It. It lasted like 9 episodes. He was also in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. You've seen that, haven't you?
Yeah, I was going to say, before Pee-wee's Adventure, I didn't understand any of that stuff you said before. I didn't know the song. I didn't know the show. I didn't know the guy. I'm like, wow, you are really dating yourself here, bud. Like, that is all like old man stuff.
Oh, man, you got to go back and listen to our one-hit wonder show that I did with Yancey. If you heard the song Making It, you'd know it. It was in Meatballs, too. But anyway, he was in Pee-wee's Big Adventure because he was the guy that Francis hired to steal Pee-wee's bike.
Steal the bike?
Remember, he was like $1 ton, that guy.
Yeah.
But anyway,
okay.
So Tim Matheson is on the beach. He's spying on Fletch, right? And then he offers him money to come and hear a proposition, which, of course, just leads to a bunch of wisecracks from Chevy Chase. This whole movie is basically an excuse for Chevy Chase to make wisecracks, And it got me thinking. The sort of wisecracking, it used to be a thing back in the comedies of the 70s and 80s, and it doesn't really exist anymore. There was...
What are you talking about? Have you not seen Ryan Reynolds' film career? That's his shtick.
Yeah, I guess like when he did that Van Wilder and stuff, I was thinking more like Chandler on Friends. Was the last one that I kind of think of. I keep in mind, I don't watch all the new stuff anymore, so... you could fill me in on more of that kind of stuff, but it just seems to me that wisecracking guy was a big thing back in the 70s and the 80s, and it just kind of died off, that character. Mm. One thing I wanted to mention, though, about Chevy Chase, when he's posing as the druggie on the beach, for a guy that spends basically the whole movie changing into 1,000 different personas, he's basically a chameleon, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't really play a very realistic druggie at the beach. He's clean shaven, he's good looking. His clothes aren't all in tatters. I don't know. It seemed to me that for a guy that assumes all these characters sort of seamlessly throughout the movie, he didn't really play a very believable homeless drug addict.
Yeah, when he was later in the movie where he's on the beach, where he's got the beard and the roller skates, that to me was a better disguise.
Yes.
Better persona of someone who is, a drug abuser who doesn't take care of himself, who doesn't have 2 cents to rub together. But yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's what he should have done. So anyway, so Tim Matheson's character offers him money to kill him, $50,000. Mm-hmm. I know the film's dated, but $50,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money, to kill somebody. Although I guess if you're a druggie on the beach,
well, I think that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to find someone who is anonymous, who has nothing to lose. Right? Like that's the whole idea, is that this person has nothing to lose. Offer him enough that he'll do it. I mean, we learn more about the nuance of this offer much later in the movie, but on its face, given what Alan Stanwyck thinks he knows about this person, it seems like a very reasonable offer.
And I think when we did the Remo Williams movie review, I think you said there was a scene where the guy paid the construction worker something like $50 to kill Remo on the Statue of Liberty. So maybe just inflation's really taken a toll since the 80s. Maybe, I don't know, something like. But anyway, one thing I did notice was when they go to the newsroom, finally we see computers. There were computers on the desk. I was like, oh my God, because every Gen X movie we watched so far, I always make a note on that there's no computers. But they look more like Commodore 64s or something, but at least there was computers on the desk. I thought that was neat. So he's an investigative reporter. He decides he's going to check out Stanwyck, right? See if this story holds up. It seems a little fishy, right? So he goes to see Stanwyck's doctor and he poses as the patient to see if he can get any info out of the doctor. And that whole scene where the doctor's giving him the physical, like Emmett Walsh, who plays the doctor, like I say, he was in Blade Runner. He was Brian in Blade Runner. Yeah. So when they go to shoot this scene, when they're making the movie, the director, Michael Ritchie's basically looking around this doctor's office at all the equipment, and he just says to Walsh, "Well, use this." He hands him a stethoscope. Use this, the blood pressure cuff or whatever. And the problem with doing this is like it takes a long time in medical school to learn how to use these kind of things properly. And Walsh just basically gets handed them and says, "Hey, do this scene with this." And so he kind of had to make it up right on the spot. So, needless to say, a lot of improv, was going on, not just in this scene, but in the movie. Like we mentioned, Chevy Chase, he came out of SNL and National Lampoon, and, he was in Lemmings. So, he was a big part of that whole improv comedy movement, that basically shaped the face of comedy in Hollywood in the 70s and 80s. So I think it's natural to kind of just give him a lot of the credit for the improvisational nature of the film, but I don't think you could dismiss the improv ability that, would be on the supporting cast, just to go back to them too. Probably a testament to the director too, but the whole thing just seems to work.
So one of the things in preparation for our podcast, I did, I always like to read like the movie trivia, and I look up some of the reviews and things like that.
Sure.
So this sort of leans into what you were just talking about. The character Chevy Chase plays, he goes undercover. Obviously, he's an investigative journalist, so he's undercover. He puts on costumes. He's sort of like this chameleon where he's pretending to be people in order to get information. And it certainly works in the context of the movie. Given what we know about Chevy Chase, the actor, we assume that the character of Fletch has some of these similar skills. But one of the criticisms that was presented when the movie first came out in a lot of the reviews was that this movie felt less like a cohesive start to end film as much as it was almost like an excuse for Chevy Chase to be different characters. It was like, how do we take what he did on Saturday Night Live, which was this sketch comedy show where he got to play different characters every 5 minutes, and throw it up on the big screen, but try and weave a narrative around it. And so, successful or not, maybe, each person can make that decision for themselves, but it very much feels that way. And once I read the review, I was like, oh, you know what? That's a pretty accurate way to look at this movie. But I mean, if you're a big fan of his work and you think that he's talented at it, at which he obviously is, some scenes work better than others. And like you said earlier, they allowed Chevy Chase to be improvisational. And in some cases, I think some of the scenes we got were absolutely all Chevy, and I think in some of the scenes where he's a little more toned down, and there are certain key plot elements that need to happen, it seems a little more scripted. But for better or for worse, it almost feels like Fletch is just an opportunity for Chevy Chase to say, "Look at me, I know how to do sketch comedy," and we're like, "Yeah, we know."
So I'm going to disagree with some of those reviews that you mentioned, because that type of argument might work for a lot of the actors that were on Saturday Night Live, whether when they first started or right throughout history. But the thing is that Chevy Chase didn't play a lot of characters on SNL. That's the thing. He just played himself. Even when he played Gerald Ford, he just looked like himself. He didn't put on any makeup. He didn't change his voice in any way, shape, or form. He just played Gerald Ford just to fall down, right? So it's not like he was playing all these different characters like as a chameleon with different costumes and makeup, and then he continued that in this movie. If anything, this movie was different than what he was doing on SNL, I thought. But anyway, so moving on from in that scene when he's with the doctor, he poses as a doctor himself, and he tries to get into the records room because he wants to see if Stanwyck's really dying of cancer, right? And I listen to him he looks at the list of doctors that's on the wall, and it's like Rosenfield, Rosenblum. And the girl asks him his name, and he's like, I'm Dr. Rosenpenis, Dr. Rosen, Dr. Rosen.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just struck me as funny. And then he runs into the
But again, that to me just reminded me of the Saturday Night Live sketch with the shark. Who's there? UNICEF. What are you collecting for? And again, it's sort of to me, it was sort of a leaning on a bit we've already seen, where he just fumbles over names to try and confuse you or get what he wants. I'm not saying it didn't work. I'm just, I think
it makes sense.
Some of the things he leans into the skills he knows he has. He pulls from the bag of tricks. In some cases, we've already seen some of those tricks, but hey, they still work.
Yeah, I mean, some of it lands, some of it doesn't. One of the things that I thought really landed was when he bumps into the guy that's doing the autopsy. And the guy that's playing the doctor, he's like, "You never get used to the smell." Just, I don't know. And then he's like...
And then he takes a big whiff.
Yeah. And then he's like, "You ever seen a spleen that large?" He's like, "Not since breakfast." And then he faints. And then I thought it was funny. Like, again, it's just one-liners coming out because the nurse, she revives him. And she's like really surprised that he fainted because he's a doctor, right? He was supposed to be. And he says, "I thought that was my brother on the table in there. That spleen was a split. It was a spitting image."
Yeah.
So anyway, he gets the file on Stanwyck and finds out that he's just been lying. He doesn't really have cancer. And then in a series of what are maybe some of the best scenes in the movie, he goes to the country club, and the guy that plays Mr. Underhill, he's just this total jerk, right? Like, he's totally ripping into this waiter. He's like, "I'm not finished with that." And he takes a little bite. "Okay, now I'm finished. I bet you expected a tip. Maybe next time." Like, he's just a total jerk. He's like basically a parody of the worst customer you ever had as a waiter, which is perfect because it sets you up to hate him. And then what Fletch ends up doing to him is justified, at least by the audience, right? Because the guy's a jerk. And then I love the waiter comes over to Fletch and asks him if he wants anything. And then Fletch says he's a guest of that guy, Mr. Underhill, the jerk. And the waiter's, "Oh, I'll just put it on his account. Well, I'll have a Bloody Mary and a steak sandwich, please." He just orders 2 steak sandwiches. It's like free lunch, right? I thought it was funny.
And is he like, "I ordered the caviar," and he's like, "Oh, it's very expensive, sir." "Oh, well, then I'll only have 2 portions.
Exactly. And then I like when he has the dream that he's playing for the Lakers, and it's like 6'5" with the afro, 6'9". And then one of the things that made me laugh with the post, because it's kind of dated, because it's kind of 80s. He gets on the flight to Utah because he wants to go and look into Stanwyck some more, right? Because Stanwyck has like business interests there and family and stuff. So he's on the plane. And then again, I don't know why, it just made me laugh because I'm like, this is so 80s. This is so inappropriate. He pulls out the mini tape recorder and he pushes play instead of record, because he was going to record something. And he pushes play, and you hear there's a woman's on the tape, and she's breathing heavy. And then "You're not recording this, are you?" He's like, no, never. I'm just like, oh my God.
That was one of those things that, like, viewed through today's lens.
Oh no, yeah, you'd never
because,
get away.
if this was today,
it
would be a video, which, you're not gonna you can't video someone without their consent. Like that's criminal.
I know.
You just can't do
That's
it.
what made me laugh.
The fact that your hero has done this and it's played for laughs is certainly a sign of the times.
It was just like such an uncomfortable laugh. You know, when I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. But then, like I say, he gets pulled in by two cops. James Avery, Uncle Phil, as you mentioned, is one of them, and he says to Fletch, "You're going to really like Chief Carlin." And Fletch goes, "Yeah, I heard he mellowed out since he came out of the closet." And again, it just struck me. I'm like, back in 1985, being gay was still considered something you just make jokes about.
Yeah.
We keep seeing that as we go back and watch these Gen X movies. It's a consistent theme throughout.
Yeah, and I mean that the idea of leaning on homosexuality as humor, you see that happening. Well, I mean, you still even see it happening today, not nearly as much, but I'm thinking something like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which is only like, 10 or maybe 15 years old now. And there's that whole sequence where they're like, you know how I know you're gay? And the sequence is played for laughs, but you watch it now and it's like, yeah, no, shouldn't have been doing that. And we shouldn't, it's, again, it's of its time. It's not to excuse it, but it's just to acknowledge that when that happened, that was deemed acceptable. So, this, again, like I said,
yep.
For the most part, I think the movie has a lot of positives, but there are certainly a few things that stand out as problematic. This being one of them. There's a number of spots in this movie where they lean on this idea of, oh, you're gay, or this guy's coming out, or the one time he says, why don't you go down to the gym and pump each other? And it's like, it's played for laughs. It's, oh, well, if he's gay, that's hilarious because it's insulting to him. And it's like,
and it happens later on too, when he's in the hotel and he's talking to Gina Davis's character on the phone. Now her name's Larry. So he's like, I love your body, Larry. And just the girl at the counter turns and looks at him. It's played for laughs. Again, that homosexual joke, kind of thing. Just going back to the scene when he's with the chief, because I want to mention this. When he says, he pushes him up against the wall, and there's a picture there of the chief with Tommy Lasorda.
And
he goes, is that you and Tommy Lasorda? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I hate Tommy Lasorda. And he punches the glass. That scene always struck me as weird. It was kind of funny, I guess, when I'm like you don't really know why he hates Tommy Lasorda, but it's actually a reference to a deleted scene that was in the movie. So remember the scene we mentioned where he's playing for the Lakers? They also shot a movie where he was playing hockey for the Kings.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the poster, one of his ID cards has him as a hockey player.
Yeah,
so I figured there had to be a bunch of deleted scenes.
And there was one scene where he was actually pitching for the Dodgers, and Tommy Lasorda comes out to the mound and pulls him from the game. So then later, when he sees the picture of Tommy Lasorda, he's like, I hate Tommy Lasorda, and punches. It was supposed to be another joke.
Oh,
right? It has some context, yeah.
Okay.
But, it just didn't, whatever. They left it in, right? Because it was an important part of the scene, or it was, you couldn't have edited that out.
Would have been hard to cut around that, yeah.
So another scene I liked was when he goes to the airport hangar, and he's G. Gordon Liddy, is the character he says he is.
Oh, ball bearings?
Yeah.
That scene was pretty funny.
I think basically every scene he's in, another thing about this movie, Chase, he's either making wisecracks, or he's dressed up as a character, or just using these preposterous names of like famous people, or maybe even all three things at once. But the thing is, nobody reacts to it. Like, nobody ever calls him on the fact that he's like Ted Nugent or G. Gordon Liddy. The only time, Babar, that's it, two B's, no, yeah. I think.
Well, and I mean, in the sequel, he says his name is Ed Harley of Harley Davidson's motorcycle. So it's this, one of the things, and this is true in real life and in film. If you have confidence and act like you're supposed to be somewhere, most people won't question it. And Chevy Chase, as a performer, and his character in this movie certainly have that confidence. And I think that's why it works so often, and that's why people believe it, because that works in real life. If you're not supposed to be somewhere, but you are confident and act like you're supposed to be there, most people won't question it. And I think that is a big key to why so many of these scenes work, where he comes in and has this outrageously false name. I'm Vito Corleone, or he has these crazy names that are clearly made up, but he sells it with authority, and he leans into, I am supposed to be here for this reason, regardless of how outrageous the reason may be. And people don't immediately question it. And 9 times out of 10, he gets what he wants. The
only time that he uses a famous name, and anyone even comes close to calling him on it, was when he tells Stanwyck's dad when he's in Utah that his name's Harry S. Truman. Because remember, the dad was like, oh, and he's like, oh yeah, my parents were, fans of the former president. But other than that, no, like everyone else just goes along with these, crazy names. But I don't know. Like, part of it's what makes it all kind of work too. But anyway, like just going back to the scene in the airline hangar, like you mentioned, it's all ball bearings now. And then he goes, "Hey, can you check out the 7th Fessor valve?" And he looks under the hood.
Yeah.
The guy's like, "Oh, Gordo, it's down here." I was just checking out the luggage. Just nonstop.
But then he makes a comment about the windshield or something. Again, it's that confidence of he's made a mistake. He could be exposed as a fraud in any second, and he deflects by pointing out, like, again, he displays that confidence by drawing attention to something else to take it away from this subterfuge that he's trying to pass off. And this happens, multiple times throughout the movie. And I think that's part of what makes it work is that he's able to do this over and over and over again. And in many cases, it's humorous. And that's part of what makes it interesting for us as the audience, is that it's so over the top, yet the characters in the scene don't call out his BS.
What I think might be one of the best scenes in the movie is when he goes back to the country club, and as you mentioned, he orders all that expensive food, the caviar and everything, and the wine, and he just adds all these tips, in, and he charges it all to the Underhills, and then he goes into Gail's cabana, and she's like, the Underhills? He's like, "Oh yeah, I saved his life in the war." She's like, "You were in the war?" No, I got him out of it. And that whole scene with him and Gail and Underhill's like banging on the door, And I just think that whole scene is just great because it's really there where him and her, the characters, they start to kind of connect. And that's when he says he wants to take her to a Lakers game. And then he realizes that he fits into Stanwyck's clothes, which comes up later in the movie. I think that whole scene was really, really good. I really like that.
Yeah.
And then he follows Stanwyck and finds out he's connected to the chief. And he goes back to his apartment, and the cops are there waiting for him, so he's got to make a run for it. And this might be the second best scene in the movie, when he gets into the sports car with the kid who's stealing the car. and
oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Even though it's a car chase scene, that scene has nothing to do with the car chase. That scene is all about him and the kid. It's just their interaction that they have just pops off the screen, And then he crashes into an alley and he goes into the kitchen of this like busy restaurant. And then it's like a banquet hall, and there's this big appreciation dinner going on for Fred Dorfman. And
Fred the Dorfman.
Well, then the thing is, you weren't here when Yancey and I did the Animal House review, but Animal House is one of my favorite movies of all time. And one of the characters in it, Flounder, his real name in the movie is Kent Dorfman, and his brother was Fred Dorfman. He was a legacy, So it's just another. It's an homage to Animal House.
Okay.
Just a little tip of the cap there. But I love when the cops come in and then Chevy has to work the room so that everyone like hugs the cops so he can escape. Yeah. That whole scene when he's working that room.
That's got to be improv.
That's 100% pure Chevy Chase right there at his very best.
Oh, for sure.
And again, totally improvised. He's using his wits and his charm and his ingenuity, to me, that's what that Chevy Chase persona was all about, at least in the 80s, like we said before, Chevy Chase was much different in the 70s than he was from the 80s and then in the 90s. In the 70s, he was just a pratfall artist. In the 80s, he was a wisecracking guy. In the 90s, his career died, right? But he was also in the 90s, if you remember, he was on a talk show. They gave him his own talk show, the Chevy Chase Show. And this is something that he should have been really, really good at, you would think.
Well,
it was a failure.
I got to think that again, I don't know, but my guess would be that he wanted to be the star and he didn't want to let the guests have the screen time that you need to give a guest when they're on your show. That would be my guess for why it didn't work.
Yeah, that's a good point. It only lasted like a month. It got canceled and then his career died. But the scene at the airport I thought was interesting too. He goes there, he poses as Stanwyck, and he goes to confirm the flights. That's when he finds out Tim Matheson's already, he's already like confirmed the tickets. Yeah. And he's going to go on this flight with, Sally Ann Kavanaugh and stuff. Back in the 80s, you could ask for pretty much any kind of personal information and just get it. And it's more than just what you said about just being confident. That you can be all confident that you want in the moment, but you just can't get information without like showing ID, or like nowadays you have to show like a thumbprint or a DNA sample or something. Back then you could just ask anyone for anything and they just tell you. They just give you the information. We saw that remember we did War Games too. I remember there was a scene in there where Matthew Broderick's character, he just calls up the operator. Well, I'm looking for this guy. Oh yeah, here's his address. It's like what they just give it out,
Again, that's part of what it dates the movie. Again, not in a bad way dates the movie, but reminds you that this movie takes place in a different time. I mean, the fact that they don't have cell phones is usually your biggest giveaway that the movie's at least 20 years old. And the score certainly indicates that it's from the 80s. But this idea of nobody having any concerns about privacy of information really is a staple of older movies. And I think like in the 90s and early 2000s, that's when you start to see the rise of the internet, the rise of technology, the rise of telecommunications, and this idea that your identity and your personal information has value and should be kept secret. And
so then he finds out that like the tickets were booked. Stan McCarty booked them, as we mentioned. So he goes to this Sally Ann Kavanaugh's house, and of course he's smoking. So I'm like, oh, again with the smoking. There's always smoking in these Gen X movies. And then that slow-witted guy with the rifle, shows up, and then Chevy Chase tries to run away, and the guy just opens fire in the street. Like, jeez. I guess it's the U.S., so anything can happen. And then I thought it was interesting. He goes back to Dana Wheeler Nicholson's character and shows her the picture, and basically that her husband's a bigamist, right? Yeah. And she looks at the picture of the other wife, and she goes, "Look at her. She looks like a tramp. Could you love someone that looks like this?" And he's like, 5-10 minutes tops. Like he just constantly like with the one-liners, right? And then I also laughed when he gets Fat Sam and Gummy to the newspaper so they can give their statements. And then they go into Richard Libertini's office and they just start stealing stuff and they're putting it in their pockets and everything. I just laughed at that. And then of course the big finale when he goes to Stanwyck's house, and Stanwyck is supposed to be waiting for him so Fletch can kill him. And Stanwyck's dressed in the Lakers jersey. So he's dressed up as Fletch, right? So
mean, by now, if you haven't sort of figured out where this is going,
you know what's happening.
It's going to be a switcheroo, right? He's gonna kill Fletch and leave the body because their body types are similar. Which I mean, Fletch reveals in a very humorous way, where he says, "Your wife pointed that out to me after."
Well, he shows up in his suit, right? He just a punctuated shows up wearing his suit, right?
Yeah,
because he says, it's something your wife mentioned me in bed. I like because he says. We basically have the same bone structure from the waist up, I presume. Again, even when he's faced with death, he just keeps making the wisecracks. And then the chief walks in and he goes, "Oh, thank God, the police." Like he's just constantly like these sarcastic comments. And then, of course, the scene plays out. The chief shoots Stanwyck and they knock him out and everything. It's all good. And then the final scene, I just want to mention, when Fletch and Gail are walking down the beach in Rio. And of course he says, "I charged the entire vacation to the Underhills Visa. You want the number?" What a great line to end the movie on. But I just wanted to mention about the final scene. So when they were making the movie, they wanted to go down to Rio to shoot that scene, right? But the studio said, "There's no way. You're not doing that. It costs too much money." So the director made a deal with the studio. So he says, "If I bring the movie in under budget, then you have to let me fly down to Rio and shoot the final scene." So they say, "Okay, that's fine. We agree with that." So he brought the movie in under budget. So they flew like 5 of them down there. It's probably like her and Fletch and the director and maybe the director of photography or the cast member, I don't know, whatever. And they got to bring their spouses down. And the script actually called for them to be sitting on lounge chairs on the beach with people all around them, right? When they give their lines. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, they get to Rio and it's raining.
Oh, Jesus.
So they couldn't shoot. And then day 2, raining. Day 3, day 4, day 5. It rained the whole time. And it's not like the cast could just like go out and enjoy Rio because they had to stay in their rooms because if the rain suddenly let up, they have to quick get out and shoot the scene, right? And after 6 days go by, the studio is like, "Hey, what's going on? Where's the dailies? Like, where's your production reports? What the hell's going on?" And they had nothing. They hadn't shot anything. So the studio says, "That's it. You got to come home." So the director had Dana Wheeler Nicholson and Chevy Chase just go out on the beach and shoot the scene. And it's really, really hard to tell in the final cut. But it's actually raining in that scene. And if the sky is really dark, there's huge surf in the ocean, and there's not a single solitary person on the beach. So you think about it, after 5 days of solid rain, the beach in Rio, it's like a ghost town, right? And the thing is, if you go back and watch that final scene, like I would suggest just go back. You can probably find on YouTube just the final scene. Go back and just watch the final scene. You'll notice the sky is dark, the surf, there's no one there. But the thing is, it just works, you know? But it's just something that you would look at that scene a little bit differently if you see it again. So
I'll keep my eye open for it if I catch it again.
Anyway, just something I just wanted to mention about the final scene. So overall, we had a chance to go back and watch it. Do you have a rating out of 10 you want to give this movie?
It was decent. I mean, the things that I didn't like about it were largely because of my own personal bias, like against Chevy Chase. I mean, like I said, he's not my favorite performer in the world, but I can certainly appreciate the talent he displays in this movie. So I think I'd probably give this about a 7. Like, I think it's decent. I think that it holds up as an 80s movie if you look at it through the 80s lens. It's not nearly as problematic as, say, something like Revenge of the Nerds, although there are a handful of things that you know, cause you to sort of raise your eyebrow and go, maybe not. No, I think it's good. I think if people are looking for you know, a detective mystery / comedy. I mean, Chevy Chase, the comedy parts are quite funny. So yeah, I think 7's fair.
I think it's got a little bit of everything. I'm kind of with you. I maybe go 7.5 to 8. It's like I mentioned, it's got comedy in it. It's got intrigue, mystery. It's got a lot going on. And I think it's an important movie from the 80s, like I say, from when Chevy Chase was kind of at his peak. So yeah, I give it 7.5, 8. Lean toward 8, I think.
So I know one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast many times, in fact, we've even done some episodes about it, is the idea of remaking old films.
Oh, God. And
so I know that Fletch is a property that has been discussed on multiple occasions by various studios about rebooting it. For a while there in the 90s, there was talk of rebooting it, and writer-director Kevin Smith was asked to take a stab at the Fletch franchise. And again, he drew from the original novels, and they had originally had Jason Lee, who was the star of the show My Name is Earl.
He was just in that movie that I had to watch the trailer with my son. He was in that Alvin and the Chipmunks movie. The only reason they asked him, they would get him to do this because he looks like Chevy Chase. That's it.
Possibly, yeah. And again, I think that he could play that wisecracking guy because he had played that kind of role in Kevin Smith's movies previously, and he had that relationship with Kevin Smith. So if he was a writer-director, often writers and directors will want to work with the same people. So that was in the mid to late 90s. That was being floated around for a while, and then it didn't come together. And then I read recently that it is being brought up again as being rebooted, and there's talk of having John Hamm play Fletch. Again, it's a lot of rumors. It doesn't sound like it's 100%, but the rumors are coming from some very legitimate sources. So we may see a new rebooted Fletch franchise starring John Hamm in the Chevy Chase role. So again, it's based on a series of books. So there's a lot of source material to draw from. Whether or not they set the movie in the here and now, or whether they set it in the 80s, or even, I mean, the books obviously were written before the 80s. If they set it back earlier, whenever the books are set, it would have certainly a different tone to it. I mean, I love John Hamm. He's usually pretty good in most things he does. So I got to hope that if this does happen and he does sign on, it'll bring a certain level of quality to the project. But I know you obviously don't like the idea of reboots, so. No. We'll see. If it gets rebooted, we can talk about it more then once we have had a chance to see it.
As I always say, I just wish Hollywood would just be, a little bit more original. How about just come up with something original? This movie is what it is. If you want to watch Fletch, go back and watch Fletch from 85. You don't have to remake it.
That's fair.
But anyway, on that note, let's have some fun with Caveman. All right, man. Well, since it was my movie this week and I nominated Fletch, obviously, it's over to you to handle the trivia. So what do you got for me? Put me through my paces.
All right. We're going to do something a little different this week. I like to try and change it up a little bit.
I like a little different.
Are you familiar with the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Yes. This is like actors that are connected together, right?
Yeah. So it's like, you would throw out a name and you would say like, connect Harrison Ford to Kevin Bacon, and then you would go through a list of movies where you're like, well, Harrison Ford was in a movie with this guy, who was then in a movie with this girl, who was then in a movie with Kevin Bacon, and that was 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon because you were stepping through.
Right.
So we don't want to go that complicated, but we want to lean on that idea. So I want to do 1 degree of Chevy Chase.
Okay.
The Canadian version.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to give you the name of a Canadian performer, and I want you to tell me if they've ever started a movie with Chevy Chase.
Okay. And they're definitely Canadian, right?
Yes. And it has to be a movie. So it can't be like Saturday Night Live 40th anniversary special, because then everybody's a yes. It has to be a movie, not television, not a talk show, not a documentary either, because in some cases they do there was the retrospective history of the Monty Python's Flying Circus, and they interviewed every comedian you could ever think of. So I'm talking a scripted movie. And I'll give you the name of a Canadian, and you tell me yes or no if they were in the movie. And for bonus points, if you can name the movie, great.
All right.
All right? I got a fairly comprehensive list here, so we'll fire through them. Let's see how you do. Ready?
All right. I'll do my best.
All right. First one, Andrea Martin.
Andrea Martin. Did she ever work with Chevy Chase? I will say that she did not. She didn't do. No, she never really did a lot of movies, so I'll say no.
That's correct. She did not.
Yeah.
You'll notice many of these names are people who made their bones in SCTV.
Right.
But, again, SCTV being television doesn't count as the connection. They have to have been in a movie with them. All right, next one. Catherine O'Hara just won an Emmy this weekend. She ever star in a movie with Chevy Chase?
Was she in Follow That Bird with him?
She was not.
Then I will say that she did not.
She did. She was in the movie Orange County with Chevy Chase.
Oh, when did that come out? Was that more
2002.
Newer?
Well,
that's past my time. I didn't know.
All right.
Okay, go for it.
Christopher Plummer.
Oh, Christopher Plummer. I would figure that you're putting him in there because he did. So I will say that he did work with him. Yes.
No, he did not.
Okay. Oh, I should have went with my instinct. I thought he never worked with him, but I thought, oh, you're putting him in there because he did. Yeah. So
well, and Chevy Chase worked with Jack Palance, and I thought in your brain you might have switched Jack Palance with Christopher Plummer. So, all right, right over the plate for you, nice easy one. Dan Aykroyd.
Oh yeah, of course they worked together.
How many times?
Well, they definitely worked
in the movies.
Oh, well, they definitely worked together in Spies Like Us, and then there was. Nothing But Trouble? Were they in that together?
Yes, they were.
No, I think that was it, I will say.
They were in 4 movies together.
Oh,
they both appeared in Caddyshack 2.
Oh, God. Okay.
And in the same year, The Couch Trip.
Oh, The Couch Trip. That's right. That's so stupid little movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Chevy Chase has 98 acting credits. He was in a lot of stuff simply for a paycheck.
I wouldn't think it'd be like that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's why I was able to get enough to do this to make this work. Okay, next Canadian, Dave Thomas.
Dave Thomas ever work with him? Dave Thomas always shows up in little tiny roles here and there, but I'll say no, he never did.
You would be wrong because he appeared in 2 movies with Chevy Chase. He appeared in Spies Like Us and the aforementioned Follow That Bird.
Yeah, but his role in Spies Like Us was not even credited. What the hell did he play in Spies Like Us? Anyway.
I don't know.
I'll have to look into that.
Punched it into the search engine and it said, yes, these 2 have performed in this movie together.
Oh, go figure.
All right. Eugene Levy. Another Emmy winner from this past weekend.
Yes, I would say Eugene Levy has never worked with him.
Well, then you would forget the opening scene of National Lampoon's Vacation where they buy a new car.
Oh, right. He's the used car salesman.
Used car salesman.
Oh, man. This is a good trivia, then.
All right. This one's a little bit of a trick.
All right.
Harold Ramis. As a performer, not the director.
Right. As a performer, not a director. I would say that he did not.
You'd be wrong. Again, Orange County had a lot of Canadian content in it.
I didn't know what the hell Orange County is.
Yeah. So, but as a director, he directed Caddyshack and Vacation, both of which were Chevy Chase. Obviously, we knew that.
Right.
All right. The next Canadian on our list, Jim Carrey.
Ooh, that's a little bit newer, out of my wheelhouse. But I would say no, they did not work together.
You'd be correct. They've never worked together. All right. Joe Flaherty.
Oh, wow. Joe Flaherty is another guy that always played like little tiny parts. I'm going to say that Joe Flaherty showed up in a vacation movie at some point. And the thing is, I've only ever seen the first two vacation movies, like in their entirety. I didn't really like the other ones, what I saw. But I'll say that he showed up in one of those at some point.
So they did work together, not in any of the vacation movies.
Oh, okay. What they work together?
They were in a movie called Tunnel Vision from 1976.
Oh, my God. Yes.
And again,
Tunnel Vision.
Follow That Bird, which apparently had every Canadian performer in it.
So Tunnel Vision, I remember it. That was almost like Kentucky Fried Movie, but it was all about TV shows. Oh, I remember that.
Oh, really? Oh, I might have to go and look it up then.
Oh,
all right.
Man, I remember that.
All right. The late, great John Candy.
John Candy and him. I don't think that they ever worked together that I can think of. So, were they in Follow That Bird together?
They were in Follow That Bird together.
Oh, so they did work together. Okay, nice.
They worked together in 4 movies.
What
also,
else did they work
Tunnel
together?
Vision, which we just talked about. Follow That Bird,
right.
which you got correct.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing But Trouble from 1991.
All right.
And when they went to Wally World in vacation, he rode the rides with them.
How the hell could I forget that? Jeepers creepers.
Nice. All right.
Good
Kim
one.
Cattrall. Did Kim Cattrall ever work with Chevy Chase?
I would say no, she did not.
You would be correct.
Yeah.
How about the late, great Margot Kidder? Lois Lane from the Superman franchise.
Oh, Margot Kidder. Margot Kidder did more of her stuff like in the 70s. So it would have to be something from a long time ago. No, I'd say they never worked together.
They never worked together. You're right.
Yeah.
All right. How about Martin Short?
Yeah, they were in Three Amigos.
The Three Amigos.
Yes.
Yep, you got it. All right. How about Michael J. Fox?
Michael J. No, they never worked together.
How about another famous Mike Myers?
No, they never worked together.
No, they never worked together.
Yeah.
That's correct. All right. How about Rick Moranis?
Rick Moranis and Chevy Chase. No, they didn't.
They did. They were in L.A. Story. I believe Chevy Chase had a fairly small part in that one.
Oh, man. I didn't even know he was in that movie. Okay.
Great. Seth Rogen.
I would say no. That's newer, but I'll say no.
You would be correct. And how about Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame?
Oh, that's a good one. Tommy Chong did more of his stuff again in the late 70s, early 80s. I will say no. They never worked together.
No, they did not ever work together.
Yeah.
Okay, and last, not a Canadian, but the theme for this game. You ever work with Kevin Bacon?
No, he never worked with Kevin Bacon.
No, he never worked with Kevin Bacon. All right, there you
Good
go.
question, though, Dad.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You only missed 6 out of the, I think I got 18 or 19 on this list.
Yeah, that was a lot on there. Holy smokes.
Yeah. Well, I basically pulled the SCTV catalog and I was like, okay, here are the top 8 or 10 performers. And then I was like, okay, let's find some other Canadians. So, yeah, no, you did well.
That was
you
tougher
missed a
than
few,
you think
but,
because a lot of them, like people like Joe Flaherty and people like they always had really tiny little parts, in movies. So they would just show up in a scene, like Joe Flaherty shows up in Stripes and things like that, but really small parts that you almost kind of forget about. So it was kind of tough. That was a good trivia. It was hard.
Well, and I know you know your Canadian content. So although some of the listeners may be like, I don't know who half of those friggin' people
Right.
were, I knew you would at least know who the performers were. I knew you may not know who, if they worked with Chevy Chase, but I mean, Chevy's been in almost 100 different things. He'd worked with a lot
That
of people.
really surprised me when you mentioned that. I thought it would be way less than that. So go figure. So anyway, next week it's over to you to nominate a movie. So what do you have for us?
So for some reason, I was in this mood this week where when I was trying to figure out what movie I wanted you to watch, something in my brain said, we need to do an epic. a fantastic, epic,
Sure.
giant, long, huge, epic kind of movie. And so my initial instinct was Godfather, but I thought, nah, let's not do Godfather. So I ended up going with something a little newer.
Yeah, because you usually nominate the newer stuff, not the old stuff.
And I'm pretty sure you've seen this, and I like to try and get a movie you've never seen before, but
sure.
For some reason, I have it in my mind. I want to do a big epic for our next show.
Okay.
And so I'm choosing from 2001, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, the first part. Have you seen it?
Wow. So I actually went to the movie theater to see that movie.
Well, everybody did. The movie was a huge success.
I remember that it was so long that there was actually an intermission in it.
I seem to recall that as well, but I'm not 100% certain.
Oh, I think this is actually a really good one to watch, because I can probably watch this one with my son, at least my oldest son. He'll definitely watch it with me.
That's what I was thinking as well. Is I knew your kids were sort of getting to that age where this might be appropriate. I mean, there's obviously violence, but I mean, they're probably desensitized to that. They play video games.
I read the books. I mean, I read this book when I was, relatively young. I was probably like 12 or 13, I think, when I read this book, and I really enjoyed it. And so this is, and then I watched the one from the 70s, like 78, I think it was, with the rotoscoping, and like the animation was all crappy and stupid. But that's a pretty good pick. I got to give you that. It's a pretty good pick.
Okay. Have you seen it since 2001? No. You saw it in the theater? Is that the only time you've seen it?
Saw it in the movie theater. I've never seen it again since.
Okay, so it's been almost 20 years then. The movie came out in 2001.
19
now,
years.
I will tell you, they had the original theatrical cut, and then when they later released these on DVD and Blu-ray, there was extended director's editions where they added all these extra scenes and stuff. So there's one of the versions, again, I'm sort of looking at the IMDb to get a sense of it. The one version that I'm looking at here, it says it runs almost 3 hours, which I got to think that's the extended version. But
well, like I say, the original, I remember when I saw it in the theater, there was an intermission, so it could be 3 hours long.
Yeah. So I think if you could find either version, you'll be good. I think I know I've seen this one enough. I haven't seen it a lot, but I again, this is right in my wheelhouse, being a Dungeons and Dragons guy. I know which scenes are sort of the extra scenes and where they play in. So when we discuss the movie next week, we can determine whether you've watched the original theatrical cut or whether you ended up seeing the director's extended cut.
Right.
If you have the choice, if you have the option between the two, I would say go with the longer one. Even though it's already long, I think that it's sort of been accepted now that, looking back, the longer versions should have been the ones that were released. It's not like some scenes where it's like, this scene doesn't add value. There's a lot of work and effort and thought went into them. So do what you can. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, the first part of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson from 2001.
I have to say, I think that's a great pick. I think that's going to be a good pick for next week. I really do.
There you go.
We should have lots to talk about for that one. That's for sure.
Well, let's not make it an epic length podcast, but
This one was long enough. So
yeah,
one of our longest ones we've ever done. So anyway, on that note, we'll wrap things up. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter at Amaron_DM, that's Derek. At C McBrien is me, and popgoesyourworld.com is our website with all of our contact information. Until next week, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.